We will have the conversations that few are prepared to have, and more importantly, conversations centered on rationality. Subscribe now to listen to Rational Voices with Sunil. Super excited to chat to Stephen Barrett today, who is a legal expert. Stephen, first of all, how are you?
I'm good. I'm pootling along, enjoying my Sunday.
Nice. I mean, it's a bit crazy at the moment, in terms of what's going on with Trump in BBC. I think that's where we have to start. For listeners who are unaware of what exactly has happened and what is going on, it'd be good to get an overview and then what you think is going to happen next.
Yes, because I don't think you could make this up. The BBC were caught editing footage deliberately to make Donald Trump look like an evil person who incited violence. It then turns out that they've actually done this more than once. So it's at least twice. They resigned, the Director General's resigned, the head of news has resigned, they've sent him a letter of apology. But all of the great and good, or all of the Uniparty members, are absolutely swarming and trying to pretend that somehow the BBC is the victim here, which is their that is their modus operandi. They always claim victim status, and they blame the victim for daring to stand up to themselves. This is something you'll see repeated time and again. They don't like these people, these globalists, these Fabian Marxists. They don't like self-defense. They really don't like self-help. So you'll see it in their reaction to anything. If you, there's a politician called Russell Quirk who's just manually apprehended a shoplifter. They're obviously outraged by that because, again, that ties into their idea. They don't like self-defense. They don't like victims being able to protect themselves. And they don't fundamentally like men because men are a risk, because men are more likely to defend themselves, more likely to stand up to them. They are, and I always talk about these people as a fundamentally weak people, so they don't like self-defense. So they're absolutely outraged that Mr. Trump is defending himself, whereas anybody sane and rational, with half a brain, is deeply offended for poor Mr. Trump, who is the absolute victim of this appalling behaviour by the BBC. I've said it now on telly, but I think I've said it on telly twice, but my granny, I'm glad she's not alive to see this. The regard that she had for the BBC, to her mind, it would have been impossible that the BBC could have done this. But the BBC have done this. And we now have to deal with this fallout. And it's not helped by the likes of Ed Davey and Rishi Sunak and Alistair Campbell all just rushing to somehow say the BBC is under attack. And it's like, no, the BBC is crap and failing. And this is behaving in an outrageous way. That we are going to have to pick up the pieces for all of this. This is not sustainable. It cannot go on anymore. And Mr. Trump is quite rightly using whatever legal mechanism he has available to him. I like to make this point again, is that if he loses his case, what happened to him is still morally wrong.
Definitely.
It's still absolutely morally abhorrent that our BBC, something that you and I contribute to economically, largely by duress at this stage, but, that was once noble. I can remember listening to Radio 4 since I was 12, so I can go back a long way to a lot of nobility. And I still think the finest example of BBC-ism is now, although it's now coming to an end this year, but it's Melvyn Bragg in Our Time on Radio 4, which is still, the standard of intellectual debate and thought and engagement and impartiality that the BBC used to stand for. And now having this narcissistic meltdown because they've been caught out is just absurd. The other thing to get across to your listeners and viewers is that this is not just about Trump. Trump is getting all of the oxygen, and I think quite rightly, he's the president of the free world. Americans died for us. This is a very important thing that we have done. If Kamala Harris had won the election and they'd done this to Kamala Harris, it would still be outrageous. This is in no way a partisan issue. And I always actually urge British people to not take partisan issues on foreign countries' politics, because we don't have a vote. They're going to vote however they're going to vote, and then we're going to live with it. So, just try not to get too emotional about somebody else's democracy. By all means, engage in your own passionately, but with foreign countries, there's just absolutely no point. The awfulness is the wrong to the President of the United States. But in this report, there are many other calamities that have happened. Over 1,500 times the BBC made an error, 1,500 errors against Israel in support of Hamas. I mean, this is just insane. That's just mad. The absolute trans agenda that has been exposed, where they have they were telling 9-year-old children that there are over 100 genders. I mean, I'm part of this letter soup. You know, I'm bisexual, so I'm in the soup. But I haven't even bothered telling my own child that, because it doesn't exist in the world of children. Sexuality has no part anywhere near children. It's not in any way relevant to them. And I went through my child's primary school's guidance on it, and because we go to a pretty sensible working class primary school, which is a lot of mixed, you know, diverse, as you know, modern Britain, they wouldn't have any of it. So they pushed back, and I'm quite proud of all the stuff in small person's primary school. But obviously the BBC fell like a hook, line and sinker for all of this absolute nonsense, which is, you know, I think a danger to children, and certainly has been a danger to women, and certainly has, you know, I mean, the way J.K. Rowling has been treated is absolutely disgraceful. So again, the BBC were caught out on that one, and it's just time and time again the BBC has been politicised in exactly the same way. We all know, you know, it's this woke minds virus. It's this Fabian Marxist ideology, which is absolutely corrosive to our country. But trying to pretend that Donald Trump isn't the victim and the BBC is the victim is really just making a lot of people, I think, just not like these people. I think it really will be the end of them. Sorry.
How are BBC doing this? How are they making themselves look like the victim? I don't understand how in any situation they can see themselves as a victim with what they've done. So what's their approach in terms of them trying to show that they're victims?
So there's a BBC Radio 4 presenter called Nick Robinson who did a monologue explaining how noble and important the BBC is and how respected it is around the world. That's one of the lines that gets trotted out. One of the lefty MPs, I can't remember which one, tweeted out, you know, from CBeebies to something else, the BBC is a deeply respected institution. You can't let this one bad apple spoil the thing. But and I mean that just utterly decries the point, because it isn't one bad apple. And even in the case of Trump, it's at least two. But you know, 1,500 errors in favour of Hamas and sending money to Hamas. The BBC have sent our money to Hamas, which in my worldview is a crime. I mean, I just don't understand why that's not supporting terrorism, which is a pretty serious crime. But of course, the saintly BBC must somehow be the victim in all of this. There's other things that have gone. They've had Ed Davey on in order to prattle on that this is all Nigel Farage egging Mr. Trump on to hurt the noble BBC, which again is, I mean, let's just analyse that. Firstly, that's a conspiracy theory. So they say that they don't like conspiracy theories. Secondly, somebody asked Grok, the AI thing on Twitter, if and I'm not terribly flattering of AI, and I don't necessarily believe the hype that a lot of people believe, but it's vaguely good at summarizing publicly available information sometimes. And they asked it to just summarize, is there any evidence of Nigel Farage publicly calling on Mr. Trump to sue the BBC? And Grok just went, no, there's absolutely no evidence of this. So Davies just literally invented this conspiracy and spread it round, and they've all just sort of joined in this way. And it doesn't stop. I mean, for balance, Rishi Sunak has done an article in the Times, again, just lauding the BBC. And it's because it's this accepted shibboleth. They have these views that you just must do as they're told. Yep. You know, one of the ones, again, is that they don't like criticism of judges. So I've had to deal with that over a number of years, because actually the study of academic law is the process of constantly criticizing judges. That is actually what law is. So the idea that you don't criticize judges is just fundamentally wrong, to the point of view that it sort of makes me just very angry. But I've had to sort of walk this line of being mildly critical of judges but not going too far, because otherwise they just scream and they tell the world Stephen's an evil man, Stephen's, you know, a monster, Stephen's, you know, and it's just very difficult to bear. So we've all had to deal with these lunatics. I think eventually what I call a coalition of the decent, because I think there are decent people across all the political parties, is just going to get fed up of these utter narcissists. I mean,
Yeah.
just utter narcissists. I mean, Stella Creasy posted a video of her dancing with a flash mob last night. It's like, you are a member of parliament. This is ridiculous. You are not a child. Ed Davies' other behaviour, other than inventing conspiracy theories about Nigel Farage, is prattling around in an idiot costume, looking like a fat man in a wetsuit. Now, I don't wear wetsuits publicly because I'd also look like a fat man in a wetsuit. So I don't mind. I don't mind flinging that one around because it's true. And what they've done is walk away from truth. What they've decided is that they can control the narrative and control what true even is. And that's a very destructive. It's called postmodernism. It's a really ridiculous idea. It gets humans into a very bad state. I always invite the people who think that truth is entirely subjective to run head first at the nearest wall, because the wall is obviously just subjective. So let's see how you do. There simply are boundaries and rules, and these people don't want to live under any of it. They want to narcissistically believe that they can behave entirely how they wish. This is where a lot of other things come from. The trans issue is fundamentally based around the idea that you can't actually change sex, but they want to, and it's like, well, you can't. And that I didn't make that rule. I didn't create this universe, so take it up with the big man, but you can't. But this modern position is, I think, just going to drive us all round the bend. I think we are rightly in this country reacting firstly with humour, and then I think we just need to come together as a coalition of the decent. I think this government's about to fall. It looks as though we're heading for one of the worst economic catastrophes, certainly of my lifetime, but quite possibly of Britain's existence. I'm just personally, and I don't know anything about her health, but she looks ill to me. I think the Chancellor looks as though she's just not functioning. So I think we're going through rocky waters, but we just need to reject all of these people who believe like this. And by the way, the LSE did a study. They're only about 11% of the population. So the mad Marxists, which includes the black-clad Marxist children, but they, by the way, also have all the beliefs of the allegedly respectable grown-up Marxists who pretend that they aren't Marxists because that's what they do. There are only about 11% of the people, which is why there's still decent people inside the Labour Party, because there's not enough of those 11%. It wouldn't be enough to be the whole Labour Party, and it's not the whole Labour Party, which is why they have to control the mechanisms of running the Labour Party as rigidly as possible. And actually, one of the greatest signs of rebellion against that was electing Lucy Powell as deputy leader, because that was clearly what the machine did not want to happen. And we should generally side with anything that goes pro doing what the machine doesn't want to happen, because right now, the machine is the problem.
Definitely. I mean, it's like with BBC. I just it's just embarrassing as a British person to see what they've done. It's that international stuff I don't buy into at all. It's embarrassing the way the world, especially now with a president from a foreign country, that we edited clips of their speech across the world. This has put so much shame on us as a country, and I don't want to be associated with BBC or anything to do with them. Like, it should not be any association. I just think it's so horrible, and I think I've seen you post about it on your X page. I've seen so many other commentators. So this isn't a new criticism of the BBC. Maybe it's for a lot of people eye-opening, but we've seen this on the BBC for a very, very, very long time, where it has completely changed, and there is a purely propaganda machine. And I've been fortunate enough to go on the BBC a few times, and every time I've gone on there, I am like I'm like the villain in the program. I'm shouted at, I'm talked over. The points are constantly changed. It is the most crazy atmosphere, and I just I'm sad in some ways, but I'm also kind of glad that what happened, because I think it shows what a lot of us already know and think of the BBC. And I hope this does some sort of change. But I want to go back on your point where you were mentioning about people still defending. I saw Alistair Campbell talk so much about defending the BBC, and um, why can't people like him, and you've kind of alluded to it already, but why can't people like him, even Rishi Sunak, as you mentioned, why can't they accept the blaringly obvious that this is a propaganda machine, even if it is on their side today? Why can't they see this?
Because all of their self-interests are aligned with supporting the cult. And this is why you don't actually need an active conspiracy. You just need to align self-interest in a certain way. So you go on the BBC, but I don't go on the BBC because I'm now considered, a wrong un. So I've been cancelled from the BBC. But I mean, I don't mind because GB News gets far more ratings. So why would I care? But that I think is quite damning. Somebody like Claire Fox, who is one of our leading minds in this country. Now, Claire and I are friends. We don't agree on anything politically, but we're still friends. And I'm more than happy to recognise that she's got a phenomenally powerful brain, which is what the BBC used to have on. But Claire is now effectively cancelled from the BBC too. And it's like, well, Claire's on the left and I'm on the right, and we're both pretty good thinkers. And you don't want us anywhere near. You just want people who recite the mantras. That's all that you do. But it was very clear to me about 15 years ago that if I just recited the mantras, I'd be a KC by now, I'd be much more successful, I'd be a lot wealthier. But I just wasn't willing to do it because I'm sort of just very stubborn. I also came from very, very humble backgrounds. So when you come from a very humble background, you have, I think, a lot less to lose. The idea of not being invited to an Islington dinner party is actually an improvement to my day. That's not made my day worse. I would find it very difficult to go to an event with fellow barristers now. But again, I'm not sure that that's making my life less fun. I go down spoons with my mates, and that's much more enjoyable. I'm a great advocate for spoons and for pubs generally. I was in something called 5 Hertford Street, which is currently one of the very trendy things in London. They have a trendy thing from time to time, when you can't possibly get a booking and all of that stuff. And then the next day I was in Spoons. So, I just will. And I meet quite a lot of my, people who see me on telly in Spoons. They're often quite shocked that I'm genuinely there. But I would rather spend time amongst good people than amongst these complete fraudsters, most of whom, let's be honest, are just reciting the mantras because they know that their self-interest is aligned that way. So when I talk about this 11%, obviously there's a lot more people than that pretending they believe all this stuff. Obviously there is. And people go into whack for these crazy regime ideas. One of the oddest crazy, and it's all about, by the way, it's a demonstration of power by being able to pervert truth and getting people to say things which are obviously not true. This is what 1984 was about. At the end of it, he loves Big Brother. He doesn't love Big Brother, but he says it. So he's willing to lie. He joins what we call, this is an intellectual concept, it's called the big lie. And it's often found in communist and socialist dictatorships, where they just want you to join in the lie so that you're somehow grubby and dirty too. And my real crime in public life is that I just won't lie. I just won't. And that's largely because I was brought up by my granny, who told me not to lie. And if I want to see her one day, which means I have to get into the good place. And I don't want God saying, "Well, Stephen, do you remember when you said this and you knew it wasn't true?" So I sort of genuinely, and you can see it as there's an argument. It's a sort of self-indulgence, by the way. You don't necessarily think that I think of myself as morally good, because would I lie if telling the truth hurts somebody? And you get to those sorts of instances. Do you remember Lord Sumption during lockdown was asked a question on a panel show? I mean, the fact that he was on a daytime panel show should have told us all that something was going wrong in society. But anyway, he was on it, and the lady says, "Well, look, I've got cancer, so if I get corona, I'll be more dangerous and risk. Are you saying that your freedom is more important than my safety?" And Lord Sumption said yes. And we all knew that he shouldn't have said that. And then the outrage was that, and people tried to cancel Lord Sumption because we were all mad during the lockdowns. And I sort of look back on that question and go, well, Stephen, would you have actually said what Jonathan Sumption said then? And it's like, well, I would now. Back then, I was probably still, cowed as everybody else. A lot of this is controlled by fear, and they love to be able to terrify people, because terrified people are a lot easier to rule over. I mean, absolutely nobody can believe that the BBC produces good content now. I mean, it just doesn't. It's absolute tosh. There's a nice meme going around of when did you first lose your respect for the BBC? And I think I probably agree with Daniel Lord Hannon, which is that there were 2 protests within relatively short space of time. One was perceived as right-wing, but was therefore just ordinary British people. And there were 11 arrests, and the BBC went mental about it and tried to pretend that was outrageous, and it was, far-right extremists and rioting and all the rest of it. And then the next week, there was a demonstration by the black-clad Marxist thugs, who are clearly somebody is funding all of this, and with the copycat signs and all of the rest of it, bust in and bust out. Just absolutely ridiculous. The mouthpiece of the violent mouthpiece of the regime. And the BBC, then there were 27 arrests, and of just for wounding police officers, just 27 solely for injuring a police officer. And the BBC went 27 arrests at a largely peaceful protest. It's just like, you're just liars. That's just all you are. You have nothing of any value left to say. That was a few years ago. That was during COVID, I think. Okay. But it's sad because, and I've sat next to a very senior BBC journalist and tried to genuinely say to him, look, I want the BBC of my youth. I think a lot of us want the BBC of our youth. But if they're not going to give us it back, it can go. Because what it's turned into is of no value now. You are absolutely no value. I watch CBeebies and I've watched CBBC because of the age of my child. And, this is just intellectual tosh. It's just absolute tosh. And stop doing it. The great success story is how we are actually a multiracial society, and yet very largely harmonious, and quite possibly one of the most successful racially diverse societies since the Roman Empire. We really have got this off to a T, and yet the BBC is constantly trying to invent fake racism to sort of set everybody off against each other, and it's just like, stop it. And it's one of the lines I quite like to throw at them is that the BBC won't survive the people trying to help it. They're just absolutely going to destroy its reputation. But the output for children is disgraceful and woke nonsense. And again, another thing I find, Sunil, is that I find this very boring. It's just very intellectually boring. If all you have to do is accept the mantras, you're not thinking at all, are you? And I actually find it quite pleasurable to think. And I don't think that I'm always right about things, which is great, because then I get to think about the things I thought. And then I get to do even more thinking, which is, a fun way to spend an afternoon. And I really like taking baths, not showers, so I can do more thinking time. But there is no thought to any of this. There's no intellectual value to any of this. Apparently the Reith Lectures, and I don't know if your listeners and viewers know, but the Reith Lectures are supposed to be the intellectual height of the year of the BBC. They're named after the founder, Lord Reith, and it's a series of lectures supposed to engage intellectually with deep and relevant thinking of our time. Jonathan Sumption, aforementioned, did a series of Reith Lectures on the rule of law not becoming the rule of lawyers, which is very, very pertinent, and they were actually very good lectures. But many notable brains have done the Reith Lectures over the years and have introduced very fascinating concepts and ideas and thoughts and thinking, and really stood up to the intellectual position of the BBC. I understand this year's Reith Lectures are by a man who hates Donald Trump, and that they're going to try and pretend that he's Hitler. Right. That's just not only is that offensive and rude and stupid and silly, that is not intellectual, is it? That's just rubbish. I watched the whole of I urge people to go and watch the whole of the Bev Turner interview with Donald Trump, because I take my own advice on foreign democracy, so I tend to almost just deliberately stay ignorant. It's like, there's no point me even knowing who the candidates are for president of France. I'm going to have to put up with whoever wins. So tell me the day after, and then I'll know who you are. I don't waste a lot of intellectual bandwidth knowing a lot of these things. So I hadn't paid that much attention to the election, hadn't paid that much attention to Trump. Obviously he'd been president before, so I knew more about him. I really didn't pay any attention to Kamala because I just didn't know anything about her. I never pay any attention to who their vice presidents are, and I still, even if you tried to do it under pain of death, I couldn't tell you who ran on a ticket with Kamala Harris this time. I think most
people would be able to tell you that one.
Exactly, but this is a sensible policy. So I hadn't known that much about Mr. Trump. And I watched this 45 minutes in which he's an obviously charming and lovely granddad man. He's just nice. He's just, and it was really quite moving that he's he's genuinely hurt that the BBC would do this. And apparently his mother had great respect for the BBC too. And she was Scottish, and and he does get us. And he
Yeah.
likes us, which is phenomenal, because the best thing that can happen with a US president is to get one that likes us and ideally doesn't like France. But that's another question. But we've lucked out with a president who likes us. Yes, back of the neck, cash back. And instead the BBC has betrayed him. I mean, it's just absolutely awful. But yeah, I hope. I mean, he'll proceed with the action. I hope what happens is that we actually restructure the BBC. The chairman now needs to go. I think many members of the board need to go. They're ironically trying to get rid of the only member of the board who's any good. And of course, because the main crime that they see is the leaking of this memo, because it was supposed to stay internal and we weren't supposed to know how bad the BBC was. And it leaked. So they're trying to run around trying to blame the man who they think leaked it. They can't say that because I doubt they've got any proof that he leaked it at all. But they basically are self-identifying the only honourable man on the BBC board. So the one person we should keep is the one they're trying to get rid of, because he's obviously an honourable man. And the one we should get rid of is everybody else who's going around stirring all this, egging up and getting people to defend the BBC in public and all the rest of it. And then we need to get back. And the BBC is this is a real example for the country. The reason the BBC has fallen is because it can't define what being political is. Okay, the definition of doing something political changed. They changed it to mean saying something that isn't the mantra. Reciting the mantra, the BBC will not tell you is political. So I'll just do some politics, and your listeners and viewers can see. Society should respect and acknowledge and accept bisexual men. And that's because I'm a bisexual man, so I feel that quite strongly. But look, I've just done a politics, okay? I've just advocated a policy for society to do. Now, I think it's just the right one, and I would support it, but you can have the opposite political view, okay? And yet, if I said the opposite political view, the BBC would go, "You're being political." And if I said what I said, the BBC would just go, because it's the same thing. I'll do one that would trigger the BBC more, because I genuinely think this. Is that same-sex attracted people have been accepted by society. We had equal rights under civil partnership. We should have not pushed for gay marriage, in my view, because lots of religions don't like it, and that's perfectly fine. And I don't want to force views on people that they find discomforting or cause them a conflict with their version of of divinity. So if I said that in the BBC, they'd say that was highly political, and they'd cancel me again. Well, they just say, "We're so glad we cancel Stephen because he says things like that." But I mean, that's a political belief of mine. Okay, now the opposite political belief is that there should be gay marriage. And if you say that's in the BBC, they won't accuse you of being political. And when your definition of what it is to do politics doesn't work, as that does not work, because that's not sustainable. It's not a functioning definition of law. It's fundamentally chaos. Out of that chaos will grow mob rule. And that's what we're also seeing. And out of that chaos will grow self-indulgence. So you get at the BBC a lot of activists who are pushing political agendas, and they just deny that it's political agendas. And out of this comes the ultimate victim of not having a definition of what is and is not politics, is impartiality. Because you cannot protect impartiality unless you have a definition of what it is to be political, because to be impartial is to not say anything political. And if your definition of political doesn't work, you can't rescue impartiality. So the poor ultimate victim is impartiality. And with impartiality dead goes respect.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, we don't form one homogenous mass. This 11% who are currently in charge of everything, they're not going to hold on the reins of power. They never do. This is why the Weimar Republic collapsed into Hitler and fascism. They never hold on to power forever. But it's hard to get rid of them. But I think we need to do this. But the way you get rid of it at the BBC is get rid of all of the bad people on the board, restructure the BBC, and then define politics properly, and then define impartiality properly, and then enforce both. And once you have clearly enforced rules, you will find these problems go away. The other thing that you should do, because that's the legal solution, if you like, and I'm a lawyer, so I'm like a man with a hammer, so I do point out the things that are nails. But the thing that's not a nail, is that ultimately what's happening in our society and the reason it will collapse is fundamentally economic. Fundamentally, young people are being let down. They are fundamentally being betrayed. So the young people who work at the BBC, anybody under 40 will be on some ridiculously low amount of money. I mean,
Yeah.
really just ridiculous, where they can't buy houses, they can't buy flats, they therefore can't marry, they can't have children, which are these are natural biological imperatives which we have to do because we are. I always like to point out that the racists are bonkers because we're literally one species. We all have the same need, which is to have children. You know, we just you can't really cut humans another way. It doesn't matter that there are some cosmetic differences because of how geography works, but ultimately that imperative is being pushed down by this economic pressure, which keeps their salaries ridiculously low. And meanwhile, all the older people, the people older than me at the BBC, the people in their 50s and 60s, will all be on ridiculous amounts of money. I mentioned Nick Robinson, who's on something like north of 400,000 a year, which is just ridiculous for being on the radio. And that is a fundamentally unjust system. You find exactly the same system in universities, and you find this system, this pyramidic system, a quite abusive pyramidic system, wherever you find the woke cultists, wherever you find these Marxists. That's what the USSR was. Stalin lived great. Everybody else, not so much, and it's just, and they want to build these fat bottomed pyramids. That's what socialism is. It's a replacement aristocratic system, but it doesn't have, instead of aristocrats saying God made me an aristocrat and that's why I get the big house and you live in the tiny one, which at least humans will sort of sustain quite. I mean, we saw in Europe that it's not an unsustainable system as long as they don't get too carried away, a la the French. But ultimately wasn't sustainable here because we just don't like that at all. The British are an odd and very rebellious species, and I think it comes from our air. So I don't think it's got anything to do with being ethnically British at all. I think it's a combination of being an island and the air and just the way we all are. So I think we'll always be fundamentally rebellious, however we are made up. But these systems and these pyramids are not sustainable, and they will ultimately collapse. And that's why the reason I'm on the right is that I believe in trying to force as much of a ladder as possible so that people can, economically succeed and grow. But we've built state dependency. We have an oversupply of badly educated people who nonetheless feel that they've done everything right, so they should be rewarded. So they're very upset, and they all push into activism. This is where it all goes from. In a functioning human society, a lot of these activists will be saying, yeah, that's lovely, but I would come on Saturday, but I've got to take the kids swimming, and that prevents a lot of this. Or, I would come, but, I've been working all day and, I'm knackered. And when you get society back to being a country where young people can get married and have kids, and I mean, I would push for as young an age as possible. I'm not going to force people to have children, but I would like people to get into good employment ASAP. So I think this idea that you go to university automatically needs to go. I think we probably need people to be able to leave the school for certain things at 16. So if you can get an apprenticeship or join the armed forces or do certain other things, I haven't thought this through. This is not a policy platform, but where
I think there's far
you
too
can
many
leave at
people going to
16.
university. Far too many.
Far too many, and this produces. Yeah, and we don't need it. They're low-grade degrees, and it's just, again, a system whereby the guy at the top of the pyramid, the vice-chancellor in the university mostly, can be on 700 grand, whilst the academics on 28. That is the difference. And it's funny that this is one of the reasons it collapses, and I think one of the reasons that young people on the left would look at me and automatically I think they're trained to not like people on the right, which I always think is very unfair. At least Claire Fox, gave me a chance. I always remember the first time we ever had lunch. She just said, I'll always be left wing, and I was like, okay, we'll just have lunch. Let's have lunch. And then by the end of it, we were hugging. And I said, can we do a selfie? And she was like, no, we can't do a selfie. And then by the end of it, we were hugging and having a selfie. It's absolutely fine. People on the left who automatically hate me don't know why they hate me, and they shouldn't. because I really want this system back. I really want the ability of people to get on, get ahead, and have a life. Now, that doesn't mean everybody's going to live in a mansion. That's not how it's going to work. But real success is raising children. So it should mean that as many people as possible can raise children successfully in a home that ideally they own. Because I really don't like state ownership of property, because you see it in certain countries, in certain African countries. You know, I went to do work in one and I was just told, I just said, well, what's that poster on that building? Oh, well, that's to indicate that the people in that building support this party. I was like, what? What's that poster? It's like, oh, that's to indicate the people in that building vote for the other party. It's just like, what? To my mind, that is just insane. I just think that's abusive. You know what? And I've always liked difference and different thoughts. And if people want to think that, you know, if people want to disagree with me, that's absolutely cool. They just have to argue and formulate a rational argument. Pointing at me, screaming and pretending I'm evil. First, it's just rude. But secondly, it's not going to work because I'm just obviously not evil. I quite like cakes, quite like dogs, like young children, you know, want everybody to be happy, go to the pub, you know, go down the park, you know, and we just need to rebuild that civilization because we've become this bloated bureaucratic blob, which is really not fair on anybody. The only people who are succeeding are the aristocratic class. But increasingly, I mean, you're already seeing it with Labour. It's already obvious that they're basically picking out their children. So you see that how many members of the government at the low level have a parent who was in the government or parent was in Blair's government. You know, this is just absolutely bloody obvious. And the other people who succeed are the ones who are more than willing to just recite the mantras, never question, never think. But that isn't a sustainable state. I mean, and we're getting to the point where our country is not going to be sustainable. It will collapse.
So, going back to, in particular, BBC and Trump, what happens next? So obviously, we've seen Trump is doing a lawsuit towards the BBC. How does that exactly work? Will the BBC pay a massive fine, and that'll be the end of the BBC? Will they then have to change everything? What exactly do you envisage happening next?
The only way the BBC is going to fix is either we cause enough fuss that they have to shut it down because public discontent is so high.
Well, that is growing. That is a possibility. It's not.
It is a viable possibility. Or the other is that we force the government to step in and restructure it, as I said, to actively save it. Now, this will simply ticker on in the background as a bit of constant drama. And every time it kicks off, they will try this thing again of blaming Mr. Trump. What's interesting from reading Mr. Trump, as I did, and knowing a lot of people who engage in litigation, he's obviously very well experienced in litigation.
Yeah.
And he does one of the most important things that you should do if you're ever involved in litigation. I wish nobody is ever involved in litigation. And I used to work for a lot of individual clients, often very wealthy people, but people rather than companies. And I would always leave them at the end of the case going, congratulations, or whatever. I sincerely hope that you never see me again. You know, because litigation is a very destructive thing. It is passive aggression. It's very damaging to you, and it drains anybody. And so he does what a seasoned litigator does, which is to just compartmentalize it and shut it out of his mind. Absolutely obvious to me that he's going to leave it with those lawyers in Florida. He's not going to spend a thought on it in the day. And then if there's anything that they need from him, they will get in touch. And that is how you deal with litigation. Otherwise, you sit there constantly worrying about it. You know, and it does consume you in that way. And so Donald Trump is not going to be thinking about this every day. He might think about it when it's brought up, and there will be periods of time at which it will become more dramatic. So when he issues proceedings in Florida, however they do that, that will be a day in which this will be back in the news agenda. Yeah. And then the first court hearing will be a day it's back in the news agenda. Now, the Americans also have this thing about deposition and how they do evidence, which I don't understand because I'm not trained in that system and I don't really know anything about it. I don't know anything more than the people who watch it on telly from American shows. We don't have that system. That's not how we build evidence. I could tell you how a case would run here, but it's going to run differently in Florida. But that strikes me as something that might get a lot of attention. And then there will be disclosure, and it may well turn out that the BBC have done this more before. It may well come out that the BBC have done this to other people. That's something that else will come out of this process. So it's just going to be the BBC constantly looking like the bad guy throughout, which is why my advice to them was to negotiate a settlement, to publicly apologize, throw yourselves, on your sword and pay something. I mean, you could have structured it, I think, quite early on as saying something like, we could make a donation to the Free Speech Union. That sort of thing to get the president, to give him what we call an off-ramp. But they have just antagonized him. And this is why the number has increased. He did not arbitrarily say 1 billion and then arbitrarily say 5 billion. That is his legal advisors. And they have to manage their clients' expectations. Remember, he sued CBS for 100 billion. So there is the capacity.
He's won other court cases against media companies. He's won. So that's why I was asking, could this, when we're hearing these figures being blurted out, 1 billion, 5 billion, a lot of people would just presume and think, oh, it's just a number plucked out of anywhere. But clearly not, is what you're saying.
They have a system of structured damages, so they will not just be making these numbers up. And the thing to make, I think the most important point, is that suing CBS for 100 billion is what he did on legal advice, but he thought that was morally less worse than this. So the one that actually has offended him is the BBC one, but he's still only proposing suing the BBC for 5 billion. That's not because he wants to sue them for less than he sued CBS. He will, as an emotional person or just a normal human being, he will want to sue them for more than he sued CBS. But his lawyers will be saying, look, no, the BBC's got very limited coverage here. The impact's going to be lesser. I really don't think we can get that sum. This is. But to my mind, the 1 billion to 5 billion is because they discovered the second example. And so there's every possibility that if the BBC carries on in this litigation, and I really don't think it should, I don't think it should be in charge of this litigation because ultimately we pay. So I don't see why the board gets to run this. And I would rather have the Culture Secretary run this. I know it's Lisa Nandy, and I know it's a Labour government, and I know this Labour government looks completely incompetent. But it's still then at least there's a vague democratic accountability. We could ask questions of Lisa Nandy in Parliament. We could find out what's going on with the case. And the press could hold Lisa Nandy to account. And that way, this litigation could be conducted in a much more open and democratic way. I'm afraid that what's very likely to happen is that we're only going to get told stuff from the US because the BBC will just do what the corporate socialists do, which is to get defensive and not leak anything and, just close ranks. And I think we've all seen the rise of corporate defensive behaviour over the last 15, 20 years. Most of us have experienced it whenever something goes wrong. We apologise if any offence has been caught. It's like, oh, for goodness sake, just say sorry, you divs. But again, this is because they think this type of behaviour is clever. It's not clever. It's going to likely get us into more trouble. I can foresee that the number is only likely to grow. Realistically, because if they discover more things that the BBC have done and the BBC make it worse, the number's much more likely to grow. And I also don't sorry.
They've definitely got more stuff. Surely, when you said it earlier about other disclosures, surely there's going to be other people who have probably felt bad things towards the BBC and thought that they've definitely done me wrong or whatever, and they've decided to investigate. Surely that this discovery there'll be plenty of people, I'm sure.
I think it's absolutely inevitable. So I think, again, I question the competence of the BBC board in simply allowing this to push on. Where is the good result for you? What is the result? You're not going to convince the nation that you're a victim. You're not. If you think that's what's going to happen, then I'm afraid you are absolutely deluded. And the nation is not going to dislike Mr. Trump because the more they see of Mr. Trump, the more they're going to like him. He was a bigger-than-life figure, so he was easy to lampoon, I think, initially. But the more people are exposed to him, the more people are going to go, he seems like a decent guy. Yeah. And he went on about how he bored his daughter, and his daughter told him off because he was always telling her not to do drink or drugs, and not to smoke. And it's just like that's just quite a charming admission that you would do. It's like, my daughter told me off. It's like, you're really quite a lovely man. And you're going to see him with his grandchildren and stuff, and it's just going to inevitably make the country like him more and the BBC less. And I really think that this is a catastrophic error of judgment by the BBC to even allow it to get this far. I would have really, and I say that having been on the inside of this type of thing, which we call reputation management. It's gone on too long. And who the hell is advising them? I know competent firms and competent groups of people. I used to work as part of teams. You work as part of teams with private investigators, with accountants and forensic accountants, with PR specialists and teams, and ex-journalists writing copy. And you're just creating this, you're managing the situation as well as the litigation. And yet the BBC does not strike me as having any of that degree of control at all. Again, it's just corporate defensive behavior, plowing on and hoping they can convince the nation that they are the victim, not Donald Trump. But this is going to blow up in their eyes. The first time Donald Trump does an interview is saying, "I'm actually really worried that the British people will end up paying for this and not the corrupt BBC executives." All the people in Britain are going to go, "Yeah, we love you. Now we hate them." It's just kidding. It's just, how's that going to play out? And they just don't seem to be able to think about these things in any sort of a structured way. And it's because, I dare say it, but this corporate socialist system isn't really merit-based recruitment. And when you don't have merit-based recruitment, you don't end up with competent people. I single him out, and I feel a bit guilty because he really is just dim. But there's a Labour MP called Tris Osborne, and he's, oh my God, look at his social media. All he does is recite the government line. It's like, the government is making everything better. And it's like, no one believes you, Tris. Why do you do this? It's just awful. Stop it, man. I sometimes use that gif of The Simpsons, stop it, he's already dead. It's just like, why are you doing this? But you don't have meretricious people. You don't have people of ability. And I don't suspect we have many at the BBC. As I said, they're trying to hound out the only one who seems to have any skill, which I should name him. I should say that's Robbie Gibb, who was press secretary or head of number 10 under Theresa May, I think. So that's why they hate her. But again, Theresa May, she's not exactly some right winger. I mean, come on. So I think it's going to get worse for the BBC. I think it could ultimately lead to its destruction. And Donald Trump seems to see this as a moral thing. So it's just only going to push on. A sensible government would intervene and stop it, because our relationship with the United States is far more important than anything else. Yeah. I mean, American boys half my age or less than half my age died to protect our country. Yeah. I just can't be having this. This is not, I don't mind teasing them about the little differences between us and elevators and sidewalks and all the rest of it. But when push comes to shove, you're going to stand with the Americans. You just bloody well are. I think the whole country knows that. And this is just, how can they argue? And this is why they're trying to pretend it was an editorial mistake or just deflect attention. But it won't work.
There's no way that's an editorial mistake, and to do it twice, there's no way this is a deliberate thing that they've done. And I'm sure, I've not seen any evidence for this, but I think if they really dug deeper, there'll be lots of other examples, not just of President Trump, of other people. And that's why if I was them, you'd want this to go away quickly and quietly as possible, because I just feel like there's so many people who have been aggrieved from the BBC. I can just think, me personally, every time I've gone on, I always just think I was, similar to yourself, not allowed to go on the BBC, and now I realise why I do go on, because they go on to shout at me and talk over me, and then to basically, and that's in short why I end up going on the BBC. And I just think there'll be so many people out there that will be seeing what's happened to President Trump and thinking, I'm sure that happened to me, or I kind of think that could have happened to me, and they've actually will investigate and dig deeper, and it makes sense for them to just do this quickly and quietly as possible. But I think for Brits, I think the good thing is they have been exposed, and maybe this will move them away. I just don't see why they can't go to a subscription model like everyone else and let people decide if they want it or not. I don't get why they can't just do that, and why people are forced to pay a license fee.
Yes, I mean, the other thing that I don't like, and I've worried about it for years, is the use of external production companies to produce programs and then them owning the copyright, because and Channel 4 do it too, and that just looks dodgy to my mind. I don't understand that model. That doesn't seem fair to the people who actually paid for the BBC. And another one is to flag there, and this is of course where the brilliant journalist Charlotte Gill deserves a lot of credit, but she's bringing a lot of attention to the funding they receive. So they receive lots of funding from all sorts of questionable things, not least of all the EU. Why on earth is the EU giving them $1.5 billion? Why? What for? What is the that we used to get worried about things like that, and they pretend to get very worried about Russian influence, and it's like, well, hang on a second, why doesn't this apply to the EU? And that's what I mean by the breakdown and consistency of rules. All of this is going to come to a massive head with something called the budget,
Yeah.
because Rachel Reeves is currently trapped in this problem that corporate socialism doesn't work, and this is its end state. And the only way out for our country, the only way out, is to simplify our rules and cut the state and rebuild a ladder so that people can succeed in their lives and that they can have kids wrong. That is the only way out. And
Yeah.
either we achieve that democratically, or what happened in Germany was a shouty, angry man came along and promised to do that, and then they went with him rather because they thought their democracy wasn't working. So we must show people that I'm a great Democrat and I'm a fundamental believer in democracy. I really hate dictators, not least of all because I'm exactly the type of person who gets thrown out of a window by dictators. So I wouldn't expect to live terribly long. An acid test of have we got a dictator or not might be, well, Stephen's apparently disappeared. But not to have too huge an ego, but honestly, I am exactly the type of person to go. But democracy needs to be explained to people. People need to understand its value. And going around and calling it populism, when really all you mean is what people want, that's offensive, that's rude, that's anti-democratic.
Yeah.
One of the defenders of the BBC are trying to say that the BBC supports democracy. It's like, no, it doesn't. It doesn't believe in any dissenting view at all. It has its mantras, and you either follow them or as you say, you get shouted at or cancelled. This is not a respectable organisation. So Rachel Reeves is going to come, push is going to come to shove in 10 days, I know now, on the 26th of November when she has to do a budget. And she will feel this immense political pressure to tax more and spend more when you can't. Because the Laffer curve is real, and we are well beyond peak taxation. We are now having more taxes yet raising less money. So we've already moved into that period. And if she pushes us further into that period, it's just going to get even worse. We'll have even more taxes and even less money. And people will flee the country. Wealth is already fleeing the country. Huge amount of it is gone, not least of all because of her ridiculous kite flying. I mean, the idea of an exit tax, it's like, don't put that in the papers, love. They'll leave today. It's just like, they'll leave before the exit tax comes in, you loon. And I think that she's under immense psychological pressure. I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but she doesn't look well to me. And she did cry in the House of Commons, and that's not normal. This is not normal behaviour for anybody to be doing. And I just think she's in this absolutely impossible position whereby we're probably going to have some massive economic meltdown because corporate socialism doesn't work. These fat-bottomed pyramids, which abuse the young and turn them into activists or turn them into perpetual children. You've got people now in age 35, 36. That used to be a respectable age for, being not old, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You should own a house and have kids by then. And then instead they're going on demonstrations and putting things through their nose and dyeing their hair purple and just trying to pretend that they're still 19 when they're not. And it's we are a fundamentally broken system because the truths about humanity are being denied. And we are just an ape. And we have to structure ourselves, I think, in the best way we can. And this one of the reasons I'm right-wing, so that we can get that structure in. But that's generally so because I believe in having the idea of having a bit of spare money left over. Because if we as a country are so well run that not only can we pay for everything, but we've got a bit of money left over, then we can do nice things like make sure that our pensioners are definitely looked after, improve early care for children, and I tend to gravitate towards children and old people and expect that everybody in the middle to be working, and all the disabled. But instead, all these corporate socialists can offer is death. And that's all they're offering. That's why they're offering abortion and extending that. That's why they're offering these eugenics-based mass killing systems. That's all they can offer you because you're an unproductive meat unit to their eyes, and they don't have any money because they are really bad at running countries.
I mean, Rachel is, I couldn't agree more. Like, she doesn't look, I don't know I don't want to say illness, but just looks like somebody who's incredibly stressed and somebody who's going through something that is, and I think it's sad, but it's also the product of having somebody who is woefully incompetent and should not be in that job position. That is somebody who has no experience, has no reason to be in that job position. She should not be the Chancellor of England. That is crazy, crazy, crazy. That is we talked about President Trump, and I've seen so many memes and stuff on X Twitter where it's like the years of experience in business and stuff in their cabinet, and it's like over 100, 200 years, and then you compare it to the UK's and it's zero. Like there is no one in the British cabinet that has ever successfully run a business. They are in charge of running the country. It just makes absolutely no sense, and it's really, really worrying. I mean, we something that I'm conscious of time, but I'm something that you mentioned we were talking about off air, and I definitely want to bring this up because it's something that I've really been talking quite a lot, funny enough, with quite a few of my European friends that I've made recently, and they've been talking about how they feel the European Union is just run by lawyers, and that's one of the problems of the EU. They're just full of bureaucrats and full of lawyers. You were mentioning it really briefly early on, off air. What are your thoughts on that, and what are your thoughts on the over legalization of the United Kingdom in particular?
So the entirety of the West has fallen into this problem. So the EU is definitely in this problem, as are we. By the way, we never realistically left. We still run a version of the EU, and we still copy most of their laws, and we're going to be copying even more of them. But you get this in because I don't like to take too much of a position on the EU because Brexit was so emotional, and I was really just outraged at the people who wouldn't accept the result. Because however you voted, you should accept the result.
100%.
And that the real constitutional tension to me was the refusal to accept the result. And I praised Jonathan Sumption earlier, so now I'll punch him in the face. But he went on telly and said, we shouldn't respect it because it's only 51%, 49%. Well, Jonathan Sumption and I come from the same division of the High Court, the same part of the law, and all of our trials. We don't have innocence until proven guilty and beyond reasonable doubt. We have the balance of possibilities. So every single trial Jonathan's ever won has been on a 51% basis. So the idea that is an unjust measure was just not something one of us should have ever raised, in my view. But the EU is definitely this problem. It sort of knows it. Mario Draghi diagnosed that, and there was a very nice document which has been completely ignored by the EU, saying that they should do effectively what I've told us to do, which is to cut our laws down and restructure and simplify our system. The EU is probably incapable of doing that simply because ultimately the reason it makes it's law printers go burr, and I think most people understand that if you just print money you get inflation, and if you just print law you just get stagnation. It's just it does it. But the EU produces laws largely for the benefit of corporations. So the EU is forever changing its rules on a car safety seat. And the reason it constantly changes its rules on what constitutes a safe child car safety seat is to stop the market production meaning that prices have to go down. They want to keep the price of that high because that business and that industry will be in the EU, so they'll be trying to benefit, an Italian company, but also because there will be corporate lobbying by that business in the EU. And you have to understand that the Brussels is nothing but corporate lobbying, and that's why suitcases full of and state-based lobbying. That's why you get suitcases of cash from Qatar. So these laws are being produced because the lawmakers are incentivized to benefit the large corporation by what you do when you create all over-regulation. Is you do two things. Firstly, you artificially stimulate the market to buy. And secondly, you artificially block competitors. So, how could I start up a new company manufacturing child safety seats in an EU state? I almost certainly can't, because to comply with the regulations alone would require so much investment that I wouldn't be profitable. So you're just left with the large corporations that you've got. And we see that here. We are left with the large corporations and the banks that we've got. Competition itself is being killed. This is what corporate socialism does. The EU's definitely got it, and it will die of it too. This is one of the things, because I really do hate the genuine racists, although I'm not convinced there actually are as many as people say, because to be racist you have to be fundamentally stupid. But it's like humans don't change. There's no difference between the outcome for the EU and the outcome for us are going to be exactly the same, and the outcome for Canada, if it doesn't change, and the outcome for New Zealand and Australia they're all doing this, and so they're going to have exactly the same outcomes. And it doesn't necessarily mean Hitler everywhere, and I seriously hope we pivot away and back to democracy, which I think the British people are quite good at quietly doing this. I think that one of the most important things is always the the anonymity of the ballot. Because you can always promise to vote for any party and then go in and just go, do, 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 do. Oh, Nigel's got a landslide. How did that happen? And then it's this sort of thing, or whoever it might be. I'm not just, I don't need to just endorse one of them, but he's currently highest in the polls. But I think ultimately, because of the secrecy of the ballot, we will fix this. And I saw it during the 80s. I lived through this period when the lefties would again control the BBC and control all the media outlets and absolutely convince themselves that Margaret Thatcher was going to lose the next election, that Neil Kinnock is this heroic godlike figure, blah 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 blah. And people would go into the ballot box and just go, "Oh, Margaret's got another landslide." Doop, doop, doop. And it's just like because they fundamentally don't understand. These people don't understand ordinary people, but also they don't understand that ordinary people can rebel, and we will, and I think we should and we must. Don't listen to anybody who calls democracy populism. Just automatically reject them. They are not helpful. And this is the thing, is that these people actually cause the very problem that they supposedly want to stop. And there's got to be, we need like a word for this. What are humans who cause the thing that they're trying to stop? I always think that Caesar was opposed by a group called the Optimates in the late Roman Republic, and the Optimates forced Caesar to do what he did. They literally caused him. He was literally sat there. He disbanded all of his armies except one, and then sat there saying, "I'll disband the next one if you just give me immunity from prosecution, because I know the minute I get back, you're going to falsely accuse me of some crime, and then you're going to punish me by banishing me, and then those people don't like me, so they don't kill me. So just give me immunity from prosecution. Just promise me you won't prosecute me." And they didn't, and they absolutely refused to. Absolutely refused to. So he took the 13th Army across the Rubicon and installs himself because he has no other choice. And this is why when you deal with humans, why I talked about giving Donald Trump an off-ramp. Trying to understand where the other guy is coming from, trying to understand what's in their head, trying to understand how is this going to work. And the Optimates were sitting there without an army, and he's got a veteran army, and they're pushing him to invade. And lo and behold, he invades, or he crosses the lines, and then they try to recruit an army, and it's just full of young men and old and cripples, and it can't do anything, and it runs away and loses. Quelle surprise! It's not even rocket science. Humans are just dim. They just cause the very things that they purportedly don't want to happen. The Optimates purportedly wanted to protect the Republic and prevent Caesar from gaining ultimate power, and they literally forced him to take ultimate power. We must be wiser than them.
I mean, you mentioned about democracies, and I do agree. I think there will be a rebellion, and I think it will work out sooner or later. My only concern is there is a rising number of people that I'm seeing across the West, and I've seen lots of stats to support it, that are pushing more towards communism, and because in their eyes, democracy and capitalism has completely failed them. They aren't able to buy a house, like what we've been talking about on this episode, and it does concern me that some of the people, especially younger people, and I know it's a generation, everyone says young people, it always tends to go that way, but it does seem to worry me a little bit with the anti-democrat feeling amongst young people, and that does concern me a little bit. I don't think we'll be in an Adolf Hitler situation. I don't think that will happen, but it does concern me a little bit, and yeah, hopefully it doesn't happen. But that is a bit of a concern.
Yes, and I think we should be concerned about that. And again, if the 30-year-olds all had a mortgage and kids to raise, they wouldn't be running around talking about Marxism. And when I talk about our state now being a corporate socialist state, I should highlight that Churchill's thought that any socialist state is communism, and he doesn't really distinguish between them. What they like to do is distinguish, this is why they're always falling out. There's so many different flavors of communism and different flavors of socialism to allow them to fall out. And that's structural. That's part of that system. And it's because what they're really arguing about is power. And so when the young people say that they want a communist system, they don't recognize that we already live in one. We do. That's a corporate system. We're not a capitalist Western democracy. We're not. And I want capitalism back, because capitalism creates ladders and opportunities and all of the rest of it. But we are not. We must reject the premise. What they mean is that they want to move from a communist system in which they are at the bottom of the pyramid, and the people who have unearned positions, like the prime minister, are at the top of the pyramid. having a cushy life, and they're suffering. And all they're talking about is the redistribution of wealth a different way. And that's what all of these things do. The only type of system that doesn't try and redistribute wealth is capitalism, because it creates wealth. And that's what we have to go back to. And we're arguing over redistributing the system, the money in different ways. That's why communist systems are always at each other's throats, because you're going to have it's a pyramidic system. Somebody's going to be at the top and somebody's going to be at the bottom. The people at the bottom are going to outnumber the people at the top. So, we've got a problem here. And this is why we absolutely must restore capitalistic democracy. But yeah, the young people will start to talk about communism. Then some genius will reinvent fascism. And that's just another flavor of socialism. It's just another one. It's like an ice cream shop full of loads of different flavors of socialism, but they're all just ice cream. Fundamentally, that's what they are, and they're not healthy for us. We can't live this way. And ultimately, it's the lack of children is how you notice that this is going on. And the birth rates are now appalling, absolutely appalling. EU birth rates are appalling. Ours is appalling. There was a really bad, average sitcom when I was a child called 2.4 Children, because that was the birth rate, 2.4, so more than replacement, and that's great, and that's a healthy society.
Do you know what this is? 1.6?
It's under 2. Yeah. It's under 2. 2 is replacement level. Finland's nearly down to 1.
Wow.
I mean, it's just unbelievable. And we're just going to see this crashing, because who's going to have, and let's cards on the table. I've got 1. Yeah. So, I'm not at replacement level.
I hope to have 2 to 3.
God bless you. They are the best thing we ever do. That's the other thing, because we've lied to the kids. We've told them that the important thing in life is doing activism for magic grandpas, which it isn't. We tell them that the satisfying thing in life is to become famous, which is largely pointless. It just means that it's all that fame has brought me has made it harder to get to the bar at the Academy of Ideas, Battle of Ideas, because people keep stopping me to shake my hand. And it's just like, you're just slowing down my bar journey. That's all this has ever given me. Or they think that, success in life is academic success or job success, or all of these things are replacements. The success in life is children. That's it. Raising children. And if you work as a postman and you manage to raise 2 or 3 children, you are a success. You are a huge success. Yep. That is what people need to get back to. You don't need to be a billionaire. And actually, billionaires largely just carry on working. Very largely, but billionaires have got something that I sort of call work addiction. Because I've got a billionaire friend, and he's in his 70s. And the man works 6 days a week, 12 hours days. Why? Because they're work addicted. And it's a certain type of man, often a heterosexual man, and they're just work addicted. And that's what they do. Like Elon is obviously addicted to working. It's not, Elon does not enjoy being a billionaire. Where's the joy of being a billionaire? It's just constant work. And it's, when they talk about billionaires, it is just people with work addiction. You should just raise kids. And even my mate who's a billionaire will tell you that the most successful thing he's done in life is have children. That's it. He will just concede that it is, and we've lied to the kids by not telling them this, telling them that Marxism will fix everything and they'll live in some utopia. You're not going to live in utopia. We can't build utopia here, but we might get it in the next life. That's what we all hope, But ultimately, humans just have to get through here practically, and the real success is raising kids.
No, I couldn't agree more. I always say to my wife all the time, I was like, no matter what I do in my career, no matter what you do in your career, the greatest thing will be when we have children. Like that, or you get to give birth to another human being. It's crazy. Like there's nothing that will come close to, no matter how far I go.
There's nothing like it.
That's human life, crazy.
Yeah, there's just nothing like this. It's like I wouldn't. If you said to me, Stephen, you can go to the Oscars and all the after parties, and people should just know I like parties generally, but you can't have your child. It's like no, never. It's like, there is nothing that I have experienced, and I've been very lucky to experience all types of privilege and experiences. There is nothing that equates to having a child. Nothing. And we must teach the kids this again, and then we must allow them and have systems that allow them to have children. And teach them again. The bad people, the corporate socialists, they believe a man called Thomas Malthus and his writings. They are I don't like using unnecessarily complicated words, but they are what's called nihilists. They have a very negative worldview, and they think that human population is too high, and they sort of get a thrill about the idea of reducing human population. That turns out is why they supported gay rights, because two gay men and two lesbians are not going to have a baby. That is why they support abortion up until birth, because that will decrease the amount of births. That is why they want this eugenic mass killings, because it will reduce the population. All they believe is the writings of Thomas Malthus, that the population needs to decline. I could not be more their enemy. I am their opposite enemy. Every success, as far as I'm concerned, is a baby. And I've taught my child to be very excited about babies and to love babies in the hope that I get loads of grandchildren. I've literally been programming my child for years on this, to the point where if we're in somewhere, my child will generally point to a baby so that dad can see the baby, because dad likes to see babies. Babies make dad happy, and babies they are just the best thing ever. And Thomas Malthus is wrong. He was proven to be wrong. He was a vicar. He was not a nice man. I would use a word, but I don't want to embarrass you or get you told off. But he was one of those heads. But he just an idiot. Just don't listen to Thomas Malthus. Have more babies. Babies, 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 best thing in the world. Tiny little wrinkly things they are. And stop, they want to terrify us that their babies are expensive. And they want to terrify us that childbirth is ridiculously painful, even though we've been going through it, or the women have been going through it for quite some time now. This is absolute rot. They want to do anything they can to scare you out of having children, because they just want low birth rates, and it's just insane, because that just destroys a human society. But I don't think they're happy with themselves, and I don't think they have the best of intentions for us. And so we just must go, thank you very much for your contribution to society. Kindly go away now. You're no longer needed. Thank you. Bye. And I hope the nation does that very soon.
Agreed. Stephen, closing question. I always have to do all the guests. An unpopular opinion that you have that you think should be popular. So it can be anything we discussed. It can be something completely different. But yeah, an unpopular opinion you have that you think should be popular.
Well, if the idea of having more babies, if it is unpopular now, needs to become popular again. The idea that wealth and fame are not really that important and don't make humans better. And the idea that what is really important is raising a family, because I think families have become unimportant. The other thing is probably that straight white men are a good contribution to our society. There's nothing wrong with them. So could we stop pretending that there's something wrong with these men? Just leave them be. They're good men. And that everybody should get the Spoons app.
The Spoons app.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I'll say. Those three things.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time, Stephen. It's been amazing speaking to you.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. I only hope I've been vaguely interesting. But,
No,
but I'll run away now. Take care.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you.